Let's get started with intangibility. With the ability to slip, slide, slink, or slosh through most obstacles, harass targets relentlessly, and become the literal definition of untouchable, users of this overpowered and preferred ability can move through solid, tangible objects, ignoring most, if not all, physical effects in their way. The exact means on how this can be accomplished varies from slipping partially into other dimensions to being able to make their own particles move between other particles, all the way to being a non-physical being of energy or vibrating their molecules into a new quantum frequency, etc. Regardless of how the user does it, if they can ignore most attacks, physical dangers, and forces including gravity and or pressure, you, my wonderful nerd and nerdettes, have a user of this power. Shay also didn't mention that a user of this power can fuse objects into other objects. I was getting to that. Now, I think I might have just covered this part in the previous spiel that I just said, but let's just go through it. I have a habit, so help me feed it. Intangibility is the act or the state of being unable to be touched or grasped or not having a physical presence. Now, I don't normally do this, but in the great book of superpowers, we have it right here, intangibility, oh yes, right here, literally translates it to it, nah, boo-boo, you can't catch me. But despite that last bit, I still think I need to say this power isn't considered rare in any way, shape, or form. It's so common and portrayed that any other example of an object slipping through another object, no matter how it's done, can be considered a form of this power, or at least an example of intangibility, or an example of how to mimic intangibility. And to be honest with you, that's pretty much a good thing, because in order to get the more complex forms or ideals behind this power, it's better to try to grab on it in its simplest of forms or the simpler concepts before things really get out of hand. But just be careful, because the information here is no exception, and it's pretty well known for employing every tactic in existence in order to, evaporate, mist, and or vanish out of view. You gotta love synonyms. How can one nerd such as yourself grab the ungropable? Easy, by hitting that like and subscribe button. A fade just ain't a haircut, or a threat, apparently. It's a lifestyle for a user of this power. So if you want to be able to share this info with others, then hit that share button as well. If you're just here for the applications, associations, uses, and users of this power, then skip ahead to this time, right there. But if you're tired of people just walking into your room through a wall and staring at you while you're asleep, then stick with Shay and we'll, I guess we can do something about it. I don't know. Intangibility, the act of being untouchable, is going to be pretty easy to provide a little background on. Because like all powers and concepts that they're based off of, myth and legends have told stories in innumerable cultures around the world of divine or devilish beings that could not be grasped or interacted with by any mortal means. That's right, I'm talking about your stereotypical ghosts, spirits, and specters. But wait, in addition to not being able to be touched, it's believed that these entities could interact with our world, floating in and out of whatever and whomever they please. But you guys knew that too. But wait! Another layer deeper than that is how these same myths would also give these undetectable beings their own interdimensional home that exists nearly simultaneously in line with the baseline reality of, our tangible fleshy world, but out of reach so that we can't perceive it. An example of this would be the jinn or genies of Arabian folklore. What about those same fleshy humans who claim to be able to separate their spirit from their physical form and travel the, universe? But enough about ethereal intangibility. Let's talk about a more relatable and grounded concept. Cool? Look no further than the gaseous molecules that make up your environment. I don't know if you guys ever noticed, but there's a lot of space between each particle. So it would make sense that most forms of matter could pass through it, and the molecules themselves can move around an object pretty easily. In science, neutrinos possess these properties as they literally pass through planets on the regular. Another example, the vague concept of energy, because energy, in most forms, requires a medium in order to produce or display its intended effects. Its pure form, however, if it could even be extracted as such, is believed to be intangible. Because the power of intangibility is so common and portrayed, there's tons of evidence to show how it has evolved alongside our understanding of the concept. But it would be a hard sell to say that it did that on its own, because it kinda didn't. The concept of power association, which is not a real term, it's just something I made up, so don't quote me on anything that I'm saying, states, or at least shows, that most superpowers are interlinked with one another and really can't exist without the other, because if they did, the original power would lose some of its intended effect. An easy example I can think of off the top of my head to give you guys an idea, let's go with speed and strength. You want more information on how? Check out my videos on enhanced speed and enhanced strength. The link is in the description. But when referring to intangibility, I would say its #1 associated power would be invisibility, because the concepts associated with it, such as ghosts and spirits, or the down-to-earth versions such as, air, smoke, and gas, pretty much give that little detail away. Now, you may be wondering why and where I'm going, and to be honest with you, it took me a little while to understandish it as well. The simple answer, so we can keep things moving, are the senses, hearing, sight, all that other good stuff. You see, humans are very simple creatures, whether we like to admit it or not. And in our heads, the fact that I can see you means I should be able to interact with you. And in the case of invincibility, the fact that I can't see you makes me hope I don't just randomly touch you or give the impression of randomly touching something I can't perceive, because that's extremely unnerving. So, when it comes to the senses, if intangibility is shown, it will always run into conflict with the sense of touch. And if invisibility is used, it's obvious that the sense of sight will be a major source of conflict. And to a lesser extent for both hearing, because it's pretty well accepted that most objects make noise when moving. So seeing someone or something moving without making sound because nothing interacts with them, or on the other cheek, hearing something that you can't see would send most people running in the other direction, myself included. So with all that being said, it's not a coincidence that unnatural powers such as these are conflated with concepts that induce uneasy or unnatural impressions in people. But when we speak about people, you gotta remember that a user of this power is still a people, just like us, just a non-tangible people. Okay, I'm gonna stop saying that. So that makes us think, if one was truly an intangible person, not only would they not be able to stay put on the Earth's surface, which is unnatural, they would actually get sucked towards the core of the planet due to the gravity, which is extremely unnatural. They would risk slipping off the planet, and as a result would no longer be able to keep up with the planet's orbital field, stranding them in space. But this is normally addressed by giving the intangibility the ability of flight. Okay, cool. But what if somehow they didn't have to worry about that? Well, they'd still have plenty of issues. Asphyxiation due to the lack of air can lead to potential breathing problems because air is passing through the lungs instead of into it. If they're stuck in an intangible state for a while, starvation from being unable to pick up food or digest anything usually isn't brought up, but it's still a major possibility. You can also include the lack of natural heat generation because they aren't interacting with anything via friction. And if you think about it, that kind of explains the evil hungry ghost or the evil hungry spirit trope. The one where the restless spirit likes to consume the warmth of the living, or the trope where an intangible being walks through an electronic device disrupting it, or does the same to a person and gives them the jitters. Another thing too, don't expect anyone to know that they shouldn't be able to see anything while intangible either, since photons would likely pass through their retinas instead of bouncing off the retinas, making them unable to create a visual image. And like mentioned earlier, air passing through you means nothing registers on the part of the inner ear that detects sound waves or vibrations, so no sound. Let's also not ignore the fact that rendering a part of your body intangible would literally have the same effect as cutting it off. So if you only phase a part of your forearm, unless you have massive pain resistance or a form of enhanced durability, the exposed nerves on the insides or the more sensitive parts are gonna have a field day. And because superpowers affect the personality of an individual in like 95% of the cases, it's pretty clear that a truly intangible person would be incredibly boring, as he could never interact with the world or be detected by it. But for a mentor, intangibility is used as an opportunity to allow the spirit advisor or virtual ghost to accompany the protagonist into dangerous places without ever being at personal risk. And fortunately for these characters and their stories, these pesky real-life physics and rules tend to get ignored in story thanks to the rule of cool trope, or, a plot-relevant reason. Although intangible characters will pass right through walls, chairs, and tables, and various such, they'll rarely have any problem properly interacting with floors, stairs, or any other structures people are meant to walk upon. You might even find one riding in a vehicle big enough, because they normally have to travel the same speed the vehicle does in order to look like they're actually riding inside the vehicle. All those points lead to the number one question that's never answered when this power is usually portrayed most of the time, which is how said character generates enough friction, mass, and energy in order to remain on the earth and move around, let alone grab and interact with the world. Nobody knows. So don't expect an answer, just chalk it up to superpowers. But what I can say is what we do know in the metatextual sense of this ability being portrayed is that once we see a character walk through a wall or another character to establish the parameters of their intangibility, it will normally be tested story-wise in terms of endurance, its effectiveness, or how creative the user can get with the ability. Now, the ability to render oneself intangible at will occasionally turns up as a support or an accessory superpower, if it's not the character's only power in that instance, usually being the result of another power's use, like molecular manipulation or enhanced speed. Even elemental powers that turn the user into a formless mass can use its elemental abilities to travel through objects, usually with an obvious visual side effect, like scorch marks or frost residue. With these types, the power can also work selectively on the user's body, allowing them to voluntarily interact with objects while intangible, or extend the field of intangibility further from the user's body, which allows them to make other objects and other people intangible. Heroes and protagonists who have this ability will normally use it to save their teammates from danger and to be stealth gods, obviously. Anti-heroes and antagonists who use it will use it to mortal combat their targets, removing organs, doing internal damage, or just fusing them with existing objects to various sinister effects. It's a frequent given to have a scenario where no one can touch a user of this power unless they have a version of this ability. This scenario usually shows that two characters who have turned themselves intangible separately will usually be on the same ability wavelength that allows them to interact with each other and only themselves. This is usually as a setup between foil-type characters. Characters with this power will normally have low levels of attack power, medium to high levels of speed, low to medium levels of defense, which is a weird stat because they might not be tough, but you really can't hurt them, and will need practice and skill in order to not screw yourself over. That aspect, the lack of control part, is a staple of this ability. And while there's no common way to portray an ability like this, as it can range from simple ghost-like physics or molecular control, elemental control, you can even take that interdimensional coin flip world concept that I mentioned way back and just let that run wild. But as long as you can justify your character moving through solid objects, you have yourself a winner. This powers list is going to be a little different than how I do others, mainly the manipulation ability. So let's just see where this goes. With the power of intangibility comes the natural ability to ignore most forms of matter and most, if not all, forms of energy. And since nothing can interact with you in any way, shape, or form, it would be a pretty good idea to give immunity the honor of being first on this list, as all forms of intangibility, no matter how simple, complex, or strange, invoke this technique, whether it's through negation, canceling something's effects, oscillation, moving around the effect or moving the effect around you, and or permeation, passing through an effect or passing the effect through you. For this next part, we can just tab this section partial intangibility, which deals with abilities that have to do with the user phasing parts of themselves separately from other parts. Here is where you'll find most of the basic applications that users of this power are pretty much known for. Starting off with the most basic of uses, intraphasing allows the user to pass one's body parts through other body parts, whether it's their own or outside body parts. This can have a variety of effects on the target and none of them pleasant. If the target is organic, the effects on them might range from psychological revulsion to physical destruction, while technological targets might short out due to the phaser interfering via physical disruption. This is usually explained due to the electrical signals in electronics or in organic neurons in organic beings being disrupted when a phaser passes through them. Or, if you so choose, you can carefully pass this ability onto individual objects, preferably a weapon, giving them a phantom-like property with intangibility infusion. And since you can channel intangibility into an object that's more than likely going to be used as a weapon, then why not infuse it into whatever combative capabilities you possess in perhaps the most trollish way to fight someone via intangibility combat. Pretty cool, right? I'm not gonna lie, this ability does have a certain appeal to it. So at the next level, I guess we can call this tier intangible interaction. So anyway, at this level, it normally deals with abilities that allow the possessor to interact with the world and or others while they or others are intangible. Phase cutting allows the user to phase through objects and as a result, produce a cutting effect. This is normally portrayed by allowing the user to phase through a target and midway through, canceling their intangibility, as physics and the laws of nature clearly state that two objects with mass cannot exist within the same space. But what if that ability backfires on you and you end up as the one who gets hurt? Well, just shift back into your incorporeal form and that should heal you via phase regeneration. But what if you want to spread the unfeeling misery that comes with becoming ghost-like? Then shift this power outward and turn whatever you touch intangible alongside you with intangibility extension. Or you can completely no-sell anyone who tries to use any of the previously mentioned abilities on you or themselves with intangibility cancellation, which would give you or whomever you target a form of corporalization. Just a fancy way of saying you're giving someone a physical form. Now stick with me here because this might sound a little redundant or confusing, but the best of the best, those that have mastered this ability to its fullest, flaws and all, will be able to piss off all who interact with them. Selective intangibility allows the user to possess properties of being both intangible and tangible at the same time. This essentially makes your character walk around like a living cheat code. Not only does this make you immune to damage done from mass or energy-based attacks, but you're also able to absorb the energy, passing it through your physical form via noclipic siphon. That's a weird name. So we'll call it phantom siphoning. You guys pick the one you like. Also known as phasing in the energy and assimilating it. This technique is a callback to the legends and ghosts and or spirits consuming the warmth or heat, aka energy of the living via possession or physical contact. And since you can pick up on various forms of energy that pass through you, you should be able to do the same in regards to the electrical signals in the brain, which allows you to read whatever mind you phase into via phase receiving. Let's take that step a little further and actually give a user of this power to control how dense or thick anything they interact with is via tangibility manipulation. With this ability, you can make yourself so molecularly dense and so molecularly thin that you can drop into and or through whatever you're standing on with sinking. Or you can take the process of thinning out your molecules to the next level, allowing you to stick a big middle finger up to the concept of surface tension and remain light enough to walk on most unstable surfaces such as air with air walking and or bodies of liquid with water walking. And if your intangibility is thorough enough, you can negate the effects of gravity and any other fundamental forces, allowing you to float through the sky and or fly due to nothing affecting you via flight and or levitation. Or if you really want to get creative, you can imitate a form of teleportation by exploiting the fact that two things cannot exist within the same space. This is done by slipping into an object, rendering yourself tangible, which will cause the user to be shot up and out of whatever they phase into. And since we're getting creative, take that concept of disassociation from the planet's natural forces and use this power to travel straight through the planet in order to cut your travel down instantly via planetary disassociation travel. Jesus. But if you like the idea of the living cheat code from before, then take that concept and multiply it by whatever you want, because at this level of power, you're everything but beatable, as ultimate intangibility allows the user to be able to attack and make physical contact with their targets, while their targets cannot touch or attack the user in any way, shape, or form, even if the user themselves is making physical contact with the target. And there you have it, intangibility in a nutshell. This power is extremely popular for all the right reasons, as anyone with this ability becomes untouchable, literally, as you're ignoring most if not all forms of matter, which makes this power very OP. But depending on the conditions of your intangibility, there might be certain users and/or materials that can counteract your ability. I mean, there's always one. No matter what medium you're in, there's always one. And like stated before, if you can't interact with the world, basic necessities tend to get neglected, which could bring up a host of psychological detriments, which can make the story a lot more interesting, hungry ghosts and all that stuff. But that's not the worst part about this ability. Most people would see a user of this power and try to placate them, not realizing that proficient users of electricity manipulation, and to a lesser extent, energy manipulation, can channel large amounts of supercharged energy into the, intangible and forcefully link their molecules together, which could force the user into a touchable form or permanently harm the user even if they're insubstantial. If you're having trouble picturing this, just think about Ghostbusters and the spirit capturing equipment that they tend to use. To me, this kind of explains why the franchise chose to show an electric arc-shaped energy beam look as opposed to just any other form of energy. Because hypothetically speaking, if you're going to give mass to something that doesn't possess it, in order to interact with it, what would you really need? I'll give you a hint. The answer lies in my video on electricity manipulation, where the cultural and symbolic meanings reside as well. So, the link is in the description. Check that video out. It'll answer all your questions. And now, with all that out of the way, it's time to place this ability on the scale. Intangibility is something that seems doable, but in actuality, it really can't be done without a host of other secondary superpowers for support. But in an idealistic world, it would be a well-chosen power because a lot of people choose it now. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, the Shey scaling system gives this power a substantial 6. A power with its positive and its negatives, and to be honest with you, I really do think they balance themselves out. So this ability can be overpowered in the right hands and completely useless in the wrong. It just really depends on the user. Thanks for watching. You guys think of any more applications for this power? Jot it down in the comments section. Start a discussion. The index does not grow without you guys. I'll be back with an entirely new power, breakdown, and analysis fairly soon. Deuces.